Hi folks and welcome back to another video. My name is Shah and this is Thoroughly Enjoyed Books. And today I am doing my wrap up of all the books that I read in the month of February. Now, despite being the shortest month of the year, I read the most books that I've read in a really long time, and I've also read some of the longest books that I've read in a really long time. And I'm so excited to talk to you about them because I had a really great reading year and I'm really excited. So I'm just going to show you this stack first because you'll see what I mean by some of the long books. That's a good stack. It's a really good stack, I think. And something I'm really proud of is I also made a video back in January where I talked about some of the big books on my TBR that I wanted to prioritise, and I've already read 2 of them. That's all the preamble I'm going to give you. I'm going to jump right in because otherwise we could be here all day. The first book that I'm going to talk about that I read, I actually started it in January and finished it in February, and I'm not going to say too much about it because honestly I don't really know what this book was actually about. Is the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. I really wanted to prioritise this book. I wanted to make this something that I made sure I read this year because Salman Rushdie was attacked a couple of years ago on stage in New York after some threats he had received. I say some threats like it's quite minor, it was a major thing. Threats that he'd received for about 40 years for writing this book in the first place. The Satanic Verses is about 2 men, Jabril and Saladin, who are essentially like depicted as like an angel and devil. They are on a plane, that plane crashes and they fall from the plane and survive, and then it follows like their lives and the outcomes of this. I found this book really difficult to follow, which is why I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to say anything about this book that's incorrect. It took me quite a while to get through it. It is quite chunky. It is about 550-ish pages, I think, and it took me maybe 3 weeks to read because I couldn't really understand what was going on. There are parts of this book that seemed really simplistic and easy to follow. So there were discussions about race in Hollywood and in the media, but there were other times where it was just looking at religion, and I don't think it went as deep as I wanted it to go. I didn't really have the knowledge, and I guess this is a me problem, to really fully understand this book. So I don't want to comment too much further on it because I think, like I said, this is more a me problem than a problem with the book. I don't think I'm smart enough for it. But I am glad I read it. I will be reading Salman Rushdie's memoir that's coming out this year, which is called Knife, which is about the attack. I'm unsure if I will read any more of his fiction because just based on this, like I said, not sure if I fully grasp his writing and what he tries to do, which is a shame. I then spent the majority of the month reading Babel by R.F. Kuang. I have talked about this on my channel before, I think, and I did this as a buddy read with a load of my friends: Charlotte from Connie Reads, Shannon from 155 Books, and Eva from Pretty Purple Polka Dot. We had originally said we were going to read a chapter of this a day, I think, to get it finished in February because there were roughly 33 chapters. So if we read a chapter a day and then read an extra chapter at weekends, it meant that we would get it finished by the end of the month. I read this book by Valentine's Day. I think I finished it on Valentine's Day. I ended up flying through it. This is about a young boy who is taken from his home in Canton to Oxford by a prestigious professor at the Oxford University to learn languages and essentially become like a wordsmith kind of thing, who uses silver bars to enact power over the country. And it's about colonialism and language and those debates about ownership. I struggled with this at first while I was reading it chapter by chapter. I just couldn't get into it. But then I found that when I was reading multiple chapters for the weekends, I was getting into it a lot more. So I just steamed on ahead. I just powered on ahead, read several chapters a day and got it finished really quickly. Once I had read it, like once I was into it, I just couldn't put it down. I absolutely adored it. My favourite thing about this book was its footnotes. So there are a lot of footnotes about this that explain etymology and linguistics and the history of words. So it was a really interesting way to learn different things about different languages and different countries. It didn't only look at China and Canton and those Asian countries. It also looked at French and Latin and Greek, languages that we're more familiar with. It did a really good job of making you think about words and how words are also often stolen alongside artifacts. And Again, this is a book I don't want to talk about too much because I think it's one that you will really benefit from if you just read it, if you just dive into it and read it on your own terms. I absolutely adored it. It was captivating, and I'm very, very glad I finally got around to reading it. So those two books were already over 1,000 pages. I then just didn't stop reading for the entirety of February. So on the same night that I finished Babel, I also finished The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. Because I was only reading one chapter of Babel at a time for a while, I was also reading The Flat Share. I bought this the last day before the first UK lockdown back in 2020. I needed to get it read because 4 years is a long time to have a book on your shelf and not read it. And I've talked a lot this year about really wanting to make a conscious effort to read the books on my shelves. I don't want to be buying hundreds of books that again just languish on my shelves. I want to be making an effort to actually get them read. So The Flat Share is about a woman who's just separated from her long-term boyfriend and desperately needs a place to live, and comes across the only agreement that she can afford, which is to basically share somebody's flat but also share their bed, but they work different shifts. So she works during the day, he works during at night, and they never see each other. The agreement is they never see each other, they never share this bed at the same time. Obviously, things get a bit more complicated than that. Life isn't as simple as having shifts. Sometimes people have days off, people have bank holidays, people have annual leave, which was never mentioned in this book, funnily enough. But obviously that was just all a trope to get these two people to fall in love because of the only one bed trope. Like, there's nothing else to say about that really. What I didn't expect about this book was the sideline stories. Like, I didn't understand there was quite a big legal battle in this book where one of the main characters, Leon, his brother is in prison for a crime that he doesn't believe he actually committed, and that his brother is very vehemently denying having any involvement in. And I just wasn't expecting it. That kind of like threw me a little bit, but I again really enjoyed this book. It was mostly a quick and easy read. I read the physical copy alongside listening to the audiobook in my car, which was narrated by two narrators, one of whom was Carrie Hope Fletcher, who I've had a bittersweet on-off relationship with in the past. She writes her own novels and is also an actress. So she did narrate the audiobook really well, I will give her that. But that was a bit strange at some points because I couldn't get over the fact that it was Carrie Hope Fletcher. This is the first Beth O'Leary book that I have read. It is also her debut. I also have The Switch on my TBR, which I'm looking forward to getting to now that I've read this one. And I just want to make my way through all of her books because they have interesting concepts, they're easy to get through. Again, I don't really have much to say about this. Then I'm not sure what happened. I haven't read much fantasy for a really long time, so I don't know whether this was inspired by Babel or whether I just wanted to read fantasy. But I finally picked up Daughter of the Pirate King by Tricia Levenseller. This was a gift that Shannon from 155 Books sent to me a really long time ago. I can't remember when it was. I think it was sometime during the first lockdown when everything was just a little bit rubbish, because the note that she sent alongside this was about cheering me up. So Daughter of the Pirate King starts off really abruptly. We follow Alosa, whose crew have invaded another pirate ship, but as a ploy for Alosa to get kidnapped so that she can try and find a treasure map on board this other ship, this rival ship, because she knows that there are 3 parts of a map that have been shared across 3 pirate families for generations, and if she gets them all together, she can find this island that her dad is looking for. She is the daughter of the Pirate King, so she's the daughter of one of the most notorious pirates. When she tricks the opposing family into kidnapping her, they know that they can use her to try and lure her dad to them and maybe overthrow him. It's really fun. Again, it's nothing really like more than a surface level adventure story with a little bit of romance thrown in. There are a lot of references to like rape and sexual assault, which I would warn you about when going into this book. Just think of it in terms of like, there is one female pirate who is described as very attractive amongst a dozen, 2 dozen men at sea. You know what kind of comments are going to be written in this book, and it can be quite difficult to stomach. There's also a bit of a romance in here. Alosa does kind of start falling for one of her captors. It's not a romance per se, there's just tension there, a little bit of flirty banter, all that kind of thing, but you know where it's going. This is the first in a series. I think it's a duology. The second book is Daughter of the Siren Queen, which maybe gives a little bit of a spoiler about her heritage, but also it's very obvious when you're reading this book. So the twist that the second book's title gives away isn't really a big reveal or a big twist. I had a period where I was obsessed with pirates. All I wanted to read about was pirates. I wanted to write pirate novels. So I think I was sent this book off the back of that. And whilst I don't think that this was the most exquisitely written book, I don't think it was phenomenal, I did really enjoy my time with it, and I read it in like less than 24 hours. It was absorbing. I just kept on reading and reading and reading. And I definitely want to pick up the sequel really soon so I can just absorb myself back in those characters and see what happens with the love interest. I really thought that this was going to be quite a long wrap up because of how many books I'd read and because of how long some of them were, but I am finding I don't have that much to say about them because I don't know why. I just read them quite quickly, I guess, and was just having a good time and wasn't thinking too deeply about them. I then stuck to my one non-fiction a month goal that I've kind of got, but it wasn't the one I said I was going to read. It is The Right to Sex by Amia Srinivasan. This is a collection of 7 essays that she has written about sex and sexuality in our society and in the media, and it is really heavy. So there are essays in here about the Me Too movement, violence against women, misogyny, incels, particularly incels who have murdered women because they won't sleep with them or because they feel like they are owed something by society that attractive women won't give them a chance. So it's about the right to sex in a lot of different ways, in the way that people feel entitled to it or how people have power through sex. It talks about pornography and the debate whether sex work is consensual or non-consensual, which is a topic I'm really fascinated by. And it also talks about the capitalistic nature of sex. I will read out the essay titles so that you can get a bit of an idea what these are about. It's really hard to explain because it is quite academic, but I found it really interesting. So the first is The Conspiracy Against Men, which is the essay that explores the Me Too movement the most. Talking to my students about porn, the right to sex, Coda, the politics of desire, on not sleeping with your students. So that's an essay about the power dynamics between a student and their professor at a college or university and what the implications of such a relationship could be and how it very often penalises young academic women. Sex, carceralism and capitalism. So those are the essays, and I really think this is such an interesting read. Like I said, it is on that more academic side. About half of this book is actually references and appendixes. I would highly recommend this if you have a particular interest in sex and sexuality in an academic setting, which I do. It is what I specialised in both my undergrad and my master's degree. Just a really interesting read. I then read Piglet by Lottie Hazel. This is a bit of a spoiler for my book haul that I haven't even yet filmed. This is a book I picked up recently at one of my favourite independent bookshops in Keswick in the Lake District. And I picked it up because it was a signed copy and I'd seen a few people on YouTube talking about it. This is about a woman called Piglet who has been given that name because of her relationship with food when she was younger. She ate a lot of food and it was a joke that her family just never kind of let up on. 2 weeks before she's due to get married, Piglet's fiancé confesses something that he has done, and it changes the course of their relationship, and it changes Piglet's relationship with food, and she begins to experience a lot of symptoms of different eating disorders: not eating, overeating, throwing up after eating. I liked the way this book explored food and weight gain and weight loss, even in a way that wasn't fat shaming. And as somebody who is quite slim, my body is considered regular. Particularly over the last year I've lost a lot of weight, so it's probably considered more on the slim side now. But as someone who's also had their own issues with food their entire life, I didn't feel like the way that the book talked about food and eating was in any way derogatory or fat shaming. Obviously there are comments, brought up, but I feel like the author challenges those. And I feel like food and the weight gain of food is used in a more metaphorical way that was really beautiful to read about. So one example of that is Piglet no longer being able to fit into her wedding dress at one of her dress fittings because of the increased appetite she has. But instead of that being a scene where she's fat shamed, it is a scene that instead depicts the constraints of the impending marriage, if that makes sense. And I thought that was really interesting and really fascinating to read about. The author's own history as well is quite interesting to read about. So she has got a PhD in creative writing. Her research was about food writing in the 21st century. So the fact that she has wrote this book, which very heavily focuses on the food writing, is really interesting because it's something she's worked a long time on. I also believe that this is the product of her PhD. So this is something that is what she worked on for a really long time and really researched and really dove into and really took her time with. I was really interested reading that as well because she's obviously drawn on the food writing of others as well as her own. And I am not somebody who is too interested in food and food writing. I just think of some examples, but the Lessons in Chemistry, for example, is one that came up a couple of years ago. I wasn't a huge fan of it, and I just don't really enjoy books that just talk about food as food. Does that make sense? But when it was used in this way as a metaphor for so many things, I found it beautiful. I think it was such an enticing and delectable book. Most of it is told through dialogue or descriptions of food, and yeah, it was just, I think it was incredible. And even now, when I'm talking about it, I'm starting to think of all the metaphors that I might maybe miss. I can't talk about them in this wrap up because they are spoilery. And I guess in some ways you might say that the wedding dress scene is a spoiler, but it was just an example I wanted to pick up. But I just think that this is absolutely incredible. I loved the writing in this book. I want to read it again because of everything that I've just said. I want to see what other metaphors I've missed when I didn't really realise how much the food was being used as explanations for what was happening in the book. I have predicted this to be on the Women's Prize long list. I'm not sure if it will be, but I really want it to be because I want more people to read it because I really, really loved it. Do I go on a whim and say it's my favourite book I've read this year? Yeah, I think it is. I think it's my favourite book I've read this year. The next book I have is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. Again, I'm trying to just read as many of the books that I own as physically possible. So this was the first book on my top bookshelf. I organise my books in alphabetical order by author surname. And I've decided that whenever I can't decide what I want to read next, I have to go to that shelf and pick up the next book that's on there and just read it, just get through it. That's what I did with Clap When You Land. I've had this on my shelf a really long time as well. And it only took me like 2 hours to read, if that, because it's written in verse and it's so quick to get through. This is about two girls who don't know about each other until their father dies in a plane crash when he is going to visit one sister for summer and her birthday. And this has been the routine for all of their lives. He spends 9 months of the year with one daughter, 3 months of the year with the other, but neither of them have ever known about each other. And obviously when he dies, they both realise they've lost their father and they decide that they want to meet. It's a lot more about that finding out about each other, a lot of the before, than the meeting and afterwards. There isn't much interaction between them after you've met them. It's kind of more about that build up, which I really didn't expect. I didn't know what to expect with this, but it looks at that culture of secret families that I think is more common than we even understand, that we even are aware of. And it's really interesting. There are obviously other storylines alongside them where we delve into the girls' upbringings and how different those upbringings are. One of the sisters is likely to get a very good payout from the plane company because of the crash, and the other daughter's not really entitled to anything. So it looks at the differences in their wealth and the lives that they live because of that, and also the risks of the different communities that they live in. Yahaira lives in New York City, whereas Camino lives in the Dominican Republic, and so we see those different cultures clash, and we read about the dangers that Camino in particular finds herself in because of what she's had to do to survive. It also looks at friendship and female friendship and the relationships between women and how those can be disrupted. And overall, I just thought that this was a beautiful read. I'm glad that I read it. The next book I'm going to talk about is one that I listened to completely on audio while I was at work. So I think I mentioned in a previous video that I do a lot of driving for work, and I feel like I've wasted a lot of time just listening to Taylor Swift on repeat over and over and over while on those drives. I do maybe 10 hours a week driving, and I was like, I can literally read audiobooks. I could get through an audiobook a week if I just put one on while I'm driving. So that's what I started doing. This month I listened to My Week with Him by Joya Goffney. This is another YA kind of contemporary romance novel. It is about a girl who is very good at singing and has been invited to audition in California for a girl band. But she has a really disrupted and difficult relationship with her mother, and going would mean that she was kicked out. She goes anyway, decides to sneak off, and when she does so, her sister decides to go and find her, and our main character gets the news that her sister's disappeared and rushes back home. But amongst all of this, our main characters fall in love with one of her best friends. I'm not very good with names, and because I didn't have a physical copy of this book, I definitely can't even think what the names were. I think the main character was Nikki. She was called Nikki actually because it was short for Shaniqua. Nikki has obviously had this difficult relationship with her mum, and several times throughout the book she's kicked out, the locks are changed, her mobile phone is kicked off. I found it really difficult at sometimes actually to listen to. Relationships with mothers are something that I in particular really struggle with. Even though I always say I love family sagas, but when it's particularly mothers, that's when I struggle to read them. And this is one of those books that I just don't want to think about too much. I don't want to go back into it. But what I did love here is the relationship that Nikki did end up having with her best friend. She had known him for a really long time. He was really supportive of her. His whole family loved her to bits and offered to take her in every time she was kicked out. You find out just how well the two of them get on and how much they have in common. So it was a really nice book. It wasn't anything like too outstanding, but I enjoyed it. It was a book and I read it, in the words of Eva. And then the last book I'm going to talk about is this chunky boy. I recently did a video where I talked about 5 books, I think, that I wanted to read in the next 6 months. And if I don't read them within those 6 months, they have to go because they've been on my shelves for around 10 years. The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton is one of those books. And the main reason I didn't read it for so long is it's over 800 pages, which is a mammoth. That's a really long book. I don't read books that long. Also because I had it on my TBR for so long, I had no idea what it was about. I didn't know what to expect, but it did win the Man Booker Prize in 2013, which is why I wanted to read it. I have since learned that Eleanor Catton was younger than I am now when she wrote this book and when she won the Man Booker Prize, so that was quite sobering. That was a very sobering thought, in fact. So this is set in the 1860s, and we are following a very big group of characters. There's 12 characters, I believe, whose lives are all interwoven and intermingled because a wealthy man in New Zealand has been found dead, and there's this big debate about what's going to happen with his money, but also everything doesn't stack up. It doesn't seem a very straightforward death. There are things that don't make sense, and as time goes on there are lots of deals like to do with deeds and ownership that come to fruition that make people question what actually happened. So we follow these 12 men, and there are two women in the whole book. Brilliant. I'm saying that, and it was written by a woman, but you know, it's told in a really unique way. So when I started this book and saw that the first chapter was like 300 pages long, I wanted to cry. I don't read books where the chapters are that long, but then I found out they're more like parts, and the parts have got smaller chapters in, and apparently it's to do with moon phases, and the moon has quite a big significance in this book because every chapter gets shorter and shorter and shorter, and that also means that as you get towards the end it gets really fast paced. So here I would say the last 200 pages I flew through. I was hooked. Well, I was captivated throughout the whole thing. It's kind of like a murder mystery of epic proportions, and I wasn't expecting that at all. My experience of reading this was quite unique as well because I was reading this after having read Babel, and though it wasn't the bulk of this story, there were times in this book where Canton was talked about, and we had a lot of prestigious, well-educated men from Oxford and Cambridge coming in and out of the book, and the mentions of the opium crisis and the Opium Wars and Britain running out of silver, which are all things that are talked about in Babel. made this feel like I was reading a book that was part of the Babel verse, like the multiverse of Babel. I feel like my understanding of that time was really informed by the two books bouncing off each other. And I think I got a very different experience because of that. I think if I just read this without that context, without already having some understanding from having read Babel, I might have not been into this book as much, because this deals with it in a much more heavy-handed way. This is much more literary. But despite that, I absolutely devoured it. I read it in less than a week. And like I said, it's 800 plus pages. It's huge. I don't read big books. But having said that, I might just change my mind. I'm enjoying just savouring books, long books, and seeing where they take me, and just getting to know characters and storylines and really being enveloped in something. So I'm so glad that I finally got around to this. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was fantastic. And I don't know if I will ever reread this, but I would love to re-experience it at some point. I'm just going to rearrange these into a way that I can hold them up, because there's a lots of different shapes and sizes of books here, and I don't want them to tumble when I hold them up. So those are the 9 books that I read in the month of February. A very successful reading month. Do let me know if you've read any of these books, and if you have, what did you think of them? I would love to discuss your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. I'm so glad I am getting through those long book priorities that I mentioned earlier in the year, and the books that I said I wanted to read or I would have to get rid of. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you did make it this far and don't have anything to comment down below, please just leave me a book stack emoji or a heart of your choice, just to let me know that you're here and that you enjoyed the video. As usual, I will also leave links down below to my Storygraph, my Instagram, and all that good stuff, so you can come and follow me on there and talk to me about books, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Take care. Bye.